panicked depositors. The New York Stock Exchange staggers. Newspapers cry that the financial heart of the United States is stopping. At 23rd Wall Street, a stout, short man with silver-grey hair closes the door of his library. "No one leaves," says J.P. Morgan, as bankers and industrialists take their seats around the oval table. Audit teams are dispatched. Liquidity is pooled. And then the final move. With the tacit blessing of President Theodore Roosevelt, U.S. Steel may acquire a weak rival to calm the market. By morning, the panic is broken. A single private banker has kept the system standing. The question lingers. How did one man gain so much power, and what did it cost a democracy still learning to manage big capital? John Pierpont Morgan is born on April 17, 1837, in Hartford, Connecticut. His father, Junius Spencer Morgan, is a strict, calculating merchant who later becomes a partner in George Peabody's London house. Young Pierpont is often ill, but his education is cosmopolitan. Boston, Swiss boarding schools, a period at the University of Göttingen. He learns languages, figures, and, no less important, the manners of European banking. When he starts in New York at Duncan, Sherman & Cogin in the late 1850s, he brings something his contemporaries rarely possess: a credible bridge between American enterprise and European capital. What sets Morgan apart is his ability to see a company's true condition. He reads a balance sheet the way a physician reads an X-ray. He recognizes which assets are sick but curable and which demand amputation. In 1871, together with the measured Philadelphia banker Anthony Drexel, he forms Drexel, Morgan & Co., a marriage of New York deal flow and European money. They finance railroads, governments, and large-scale industrial projects. In 1895, the name becomes J.P. Morgan & Co. The power radiating from it differs from that of a steel magnate or a railroad baron. Morgan does not own one sector. He commands credit, the blood that runs through all sectors. At the end of the 19th century, American railroads are a tangle of overbuilding, bankruptcies, and cutthroat price wars. Morgan introduces what enemies call Morganization and admirers order from disorder. He forces mergers, trims parallel lines, harmonizes rates, installs professional managers, and makes shareholders swallow that stability, sometimes outranks quick profit. Not everyone is happy. Farmers and small merchants see rates rise, and politicians fear that networks of iron are becoming networks of influence. But trains run on time, loans are repaid, and the market believes again that railroads are not roulette. Meanwhile, electricity is shifting from curiosity to infrastructure. In 1892, Morgan forges a new giant out of Edison General Electric and Thomson Houston General Electric. The decision is less a bet on one man than on a system. Morgan backs central, generation, standardized equipment, and large-scale rollout, a platform that attracts investment and enables national networks. The tale of lone inventors gives way to one of engineers, accountants, and project financiers. Where some miss romance, Morgan sees certainty, not 1,000 small sparks, but one steady glow. Then comes 1901. Andrew Carnegie, the Steel King, is considering retirement. Morgan smells a once-in-a-generation moment. By combining Carnegie's mills with other producers, he creates United States Steel, the world's first billion-dollar corporation. The new entity promises to stabilize prices, coordinate output, and finance the capital-intensive modernization no single plant can manage. Critics call it a monopoly in all but name. Defenders call it maturity, an industry finally acting like a backbone, not a battlefield. Both sides have a point. Scale makes you more efficient and more powerful. Morgan's highest and harshest test comes not in the boardroom, but in the system itself. After the Depression of the 1890s, the US Treasury's gold reserves sink dangerously low. Confidence in the dollar wavers. In 1895, Morgan travels to Washington and, in collaboration with European houses, including the Rothschilds, arranges a $65 million gold bond syndicate. The transaction replenishes reserves and signals to world markets that the United States will defend its standard. The country exhales, but politics boils. Why should a private banker profit from saving the government? Morgan's answer is coolly practical, because no one else can move that much gold that fast. 12 years later, the panic of 1907 shakes New York. Trust companies, more lightly regulated and thinly capitalized, take the blows. Morgan locks his library door, has hired accountants pore over books from lamplight to dawn, and decides those solvent but illiquid get support, those rotten at the core fall. He organizes a bankers' pool to prop up the exchange. The most controversial moment comes deep in the night. The proposal that US Steel buy the tottering Tennessee Coal, Iron and Railroad to steady the market. Roosevelt, usually sharp on trusts, nods just this once. The next day, the fever breaks. The system lives, but many shudder at the medicine. That shudder finds political language in the progressive era's antitrust thinking. Morgan's railroad combinations come under fire. Northern Securities, a holding company bundling key northwestern lines, is dismantled by the Supreme Court under the Sherman Antitrust Act in 1904. It is a symbolic thunderclap. Even respectable combinations are not above the law. Yet the ruling does not resolve the central tension. Large-scale industry seems to deliver the efficiencies the nation needs. Large-scale power simultaneously threatens free competition. In 1912-1913, the House of Representatives investigates the money trust, the entanglement of banks, trust companies, and corporate boards that concentrates credit in a handful of houses. The Pujo Committee summons Morgan. He sits upright, heavy but alert, and utters the line that haunts him. The foundation of credit is character. To opponents, it sounds aristocratic. Who decides whose character counts? To admirers, it sums up what Morgan always did. Judge people and firms on reliability, not glossy brochures. The hearings, at any rate, expose how interlocking directorates, overlapping board seats, allow quiet coordination. Not always a conspiracy, but certainly a structure. What did this clash between private power and public fear produce? Not the downfall of one man. Morgan dies in March 1913 in Rome, but a redrawing of the rules. The panic of 1907 convinces even bankers that a continental nation cannot do without a public lender of last resort. In December 1913, the Federal Reserve is established, a system able to guide liquidity, stabilize payments, and dampen panics without a single library door in Manhattan needing to be locked. The fight over scale is neither won nor lost. It is institutionalized. At the same time, Morgan builds another sort of legacy. What begins as a private collection, medieval manuscripts, Renaissance art, incunabula, becomes the Morgan Library and Museum. Red sandstone, a hushed reading room, display cases that admit a public that once only heard rumors of the rich man's troves. The gesture is part taste, part politics. In a time of strikes, trust suits, and caricatures of robber barons, a library says, wealth can also preserve, organize, and make accessible. Critics reply that beauty isn't a paycheck. True enough, But culture softens the sharp edges of power for those willing to look through it. So who was Morgan? Savior or predator? The hero myth ignores that his rescues were selective. Like a surgeon, he sometimes lets tissue die to save the body. That means losers, shareholders, small banks, workers. The villain myth, in turn, pretends he created crises in order to rule. The facts point instead to structural weaknesses, under-regulated trust companies, fragile payments that he attacked with blunt but effective tools. His strength is also his problem. It rests on concentration. However skilled the instrument, a republic wants emergency brakes that are not held in private hands. The most modern judgment on Morgan may be the most sober. He delivered architecture, mergers that gave scale, audits that imposed discipline, credit signals that made long-term projects possible. And he delivered a catalyst. His dominance accelerated legislation, antitrust, limits on board interlocks, and ultimately a central bank. Without Morgan, America would likely have gotten a Fed anyway, but later, perhaps after a costlier crisis. Without the Fed, the 20th century would have looked more like 1907 than we'd like. What does this tell us today, in a world where digital platforms and megabanks concentrate power in new ways? Morgan's lesson is double. Big systems need order, capital that dares to think long, organizations that can dampen chaos, someone willing to make midnight decisions when things rattle. But that order needs a public frame, because public costs and private choices otherwise drift too easily apart. Private power can plug holes. It must not define them. Picture that night in 1907 once more. Outside, crowds tug at the doors of trust companies. In Morgan's library, the gaslight is fading, papers sit in stacks, and men who usually fight one another suddenly agree to a joint plan. It's theatre, but also statecraft, an improvised version of it. The next morning, prices creep up. The city breathes. The country learns. Not everything that's saved should be saved in the same way, and not every savior should be the same man. J.P. Morgan did not own America in any legal sense. But for a generation, he financed, reorganized, and stabilized the core systems, rail, power, steel, and credit, on which an industrial nation runs. That craftsmanship earned respect and stirred resistance. The backlash, antitrust, oversight, a central bank, curbed precisely the kind of power that had made him indispensable. His legacy is a paradox. The man who imposed private order helped invent the public order, meant to make men like him less necessary. That is no fairy tale with a hero or a villain. It is the origin story of modern capitalism, and the warning that even the best tool becomes dangerous in too few hands.